And when we put it out on YouTube, we'll describe you as Bertie as well, and Bertie and Jono.
It sounds like something from the an Enid Blyton novel, isn't it? We're off on an adventure. Bertie and Jono, I've got my pat lunch and we're off.
Bertie or Johnny start a church or something. Yeah, Bertie and Jono.
Oh, there we go. That is a whole that's a whole ministry franchise right there.
I was thinking it sounded like somebody from the Muppets, but we'll go with your one.
But yeah, no, it's great. I think Bertie and Johnny go church planting. It sounds great. But why not? Why not?
I was a massive Enid Blyton fan, so I would definitely be there.
Absolutely, that's the thing. Yeah. I'm there. I'm in a little rowboat going somewhere inherently dangerous.
With a dog off the moment.
With a slightly inappropriate dog, which you could actually say is most people's approach to pioneering. In a sense that sometimes, it's like, I think that's a good idea, but I'm not really sure. Let's do it anyway. Johnny and Bertie make a mess of it or something would be great. I think this would be great.
Ideal.
I would buy it. I'd buy the book.
If you've got if you got fingers in the Baptist Union or in the publications department, then just say I think we're on.
Yeah. If it's going to be published, can I be Jono then? I want to be the cool one out of the two of us.
Not saying Bertie's not cool.
I was sensing you were uncomfortable, John. You just weren't in on the idea as much as Rob, and now I know.
No, I'm completely sold.
Hi there, everyone. Hi, Em. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing today?
Sorry, I'm aware I call you Em. I might be the only person on the planet that calls you. I've got this habit of shortening people's names. I'm a Jonathan who goes around as a John, so... do people call you Em, or is that just me?
I've had a variety of nicknames. I think my name is often quite hard to shorten.
Okay.
Like, I've had Meals once, which then sparked Meals on Wheels, which I wasn't a massive fan of. So I think I'll take M. I'm quite happy with that one.
If it's any consolation, I didn't find it difficult at all to shorten. So it's just the first two letters, so it was fine. Well, I was going to say, just really excited again about today's episode. We've got two people joining us. So one is a guy called Rob Beamish. Rob's based up in North Wales and heads up the, I think it's the Light College and Collective, and they specifically train people in evangelism and ministry. And then the other person is John Davies, who's based down here in South Wales and administers the Pathways course, which is out of the Cardiff Baptist College. So we thought it'd be great just to chat to them about sort of what they think training for ministry looks like.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good conversation for those aspiring to go into ministerial training, or maybe just wondering what minister training looks like, because I know that looking at the Pathways course and the stuff that Rob Beamish does, it's a lot different to what I thought minister training would look like. Or so I think for those who have questions or who are looking into it, it's going to be a really interesting conversation, and hopefully we can encourage some people through it then as well, to maybe respond to what God is calling them into.
Yeah, definitely, because I think we've all seen Harry Potter, and sometimes you can have this image of Hogwarts Baptist College or something. And it'd be great just to hear from them about what they think it looks like. So yeah, it's going to be good.
Yeah, definitely excited for this one.
Well, Well, hi both. It's so good to have you with us today. So thanks for joining us. Rob from Colwyn Bay up in North Wales, and Jon from Dinas Powys. And we were talking just before we started. I've got this really bad habit of shortening people's names. So Jon, are you just Jon, or is that short for Jonathan, or?
I am Jonathan when I've been badly behaved, but normally Jon.
Is that quite regular, the bad behaviour?
No, I'm glad to say, very rarely do I get called Jonathan.
Fab. And Rob, I'm guessing, is short for Roberta or something.
Absolutely, or Rupert, or I always want to be called Bertie, but then that might just be the kind of world in which I wish to inhabit. I don't know, but Roberta or Rob or Robert.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think we should just start again and call you Bertie and just let it catch on.
Well, actually, I mean, when in the ministerial training thing, when I was at Regent's Park, I was always called Bob, but I've never ever called myself Bob. I'd get letters from staff saying "Dear Bob," and it's like, who's Bob? I'd never call myself Bob. So, there we go. So perhaps it's a training thing. They have to have a different name for training. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. Yes. Well, let's go with Bertie. I'm happy to
adopt
Bertie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Have you experienced any Jonos as Jonathans?
Oh well, see, when growing up, one of my best friends has exactly the same name as me, middle name and all.
Wow.
And so he was Jono. I've never been Jono. Jono has always been someone else. But yeah, that was the way. Jon and Jono. That was the way we were distinguished.
Yeah. I've had Jono. Yeah, I've had Johnny, which I'm less keen on, if I'm honest. It's less cool. But yeah, I answer to anything really.
Nice. I feel like Jono is like the coolest of the Jonathans. I don't know why.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I will be sharing this podcast with my friend now you've said that.
Well, diving straight into the environment of TeamTalk then, our first question that we ask all our guests is, if you had to choose or name one or two key people who have shaped you over the years, who would they be, and who would be on Team Jon and Team Rob?
Oh, shall I go first? My first pick in my team would be guy John James, retired minister, was for much of his time at Tabernacle Church in Penarth. When my family moved to South Wales when I was very young, he was the minister of the church that we went to there, Tabernacle in Penarth. And my family were part of a church plant to Dinas Powys, where I now minister, in the 90s. But it's sort of in my late teens, started to feel perhaps a sense of call to ministry. And so it was back to John James that I went and sort of shared, and he sort of helped me discern that call. It was this kind of repeated prophetic word that kept sort of just being given to me, often by strangers in churches, that it was kind of prompted me to go to him. And it was essentially a call to ministry, but it was a not yet kind of call. And years later, been teaching for a number of years into my 20s, and just felt God say, now is the time I'm calling you to finish your job and train for ministry. And so back to Jon I went, and he mentored me through my ministerial training. So I think he's certainly within my leadership and my ministerial formation, he's probably had one of the biggest impacts on me. Am I allowed a second pick?
Yeah.
Because I think during that period, I think probably the person, I don't know whether this is a bit of a strange pick, but probably one of the people who shaped and helped me to understand what it means to be a pastor is probably Eugene Peterson. For most of my childhood and most of my life, I've been in church without a minister. So I struggled to, what does it mean? What does it look like to be a minister? And it was his books, his writings, particularly his memoirs, that really helped me kind of say, okay, I felt like in his writing, he embodied something as like just an example to pastors as to what ministry is about, pastoral ministry in particular, and what it's not about. And so I think he's certainly shaped me. I know I'm not unique in saying that, and many people who've been really shaped by his writings. But yeah, he would probably be up there on the list as well.
Yeah, you've gone for two legends there. That's
I
amazing.
know.
It is John James. Is he the one that you call Jono? Or
Well, I've never. Perhaps I should, next time I speak with him, I'll try it out.
slip it in.
I'll let you know how it goes.
How about you, Rob?
Well, I was going to say Eugene Peterson as well, and now I feel that I can't. Because I think he has been so, obviously died a few years ago, so influential in terms of shaping pastoral thought. I could also, I'm going to pick loads now because I feel John took the one I wanted. People like Alan Hirsch, obviously perhaps much more recent, but in terms of his kind of stuff on missiology. And then I do have a theologian crush, a lady called Catherine Sonderegger, and her Systematic Theology, Volume 1 and 2, an American Presbyterian theologian. But her stuff is like systematic theology, which is just so devotional, which you might not think is a thing. So it's systematics for the geeks amongst us, but actually with a devotional heart. But if that's my kind of one pick of all those people, and I had Eugene Peterson, but obviously John took that. A chap called Trevor Giles. I was brought up in Waterlooville in Hampshire, sort of south coast of England, I'm afraid, and I have an Irish dad, so I can, some sort of Celtic roots. Yeah, Trevor Giles died a few years ago, but he was the captain of a boys' brigade company that became in the church. It was a big company, actually, lots going on, and he just modelled. I look back now, modelling kind of sacrificial commitment to youth. There was always something going on, but also it was through his talks on camps and each week, just a very clear proclamation of the gospel that I think me to respond to the gospel. Holy Spirit used that. And also then from a ministry perspective, I thought, gosh, if I can only communicate like him, if I can be as good, because I thought he just came across really well, at least it suited me. So on kind of many levels, Trevor, I'm forever grateful for.
That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome. I thought you were going to say I was going to pick Eugene Peterson, but I know him so well. I call him Gene.
I call him Gene. Oh, absolutely. Well, no, I'm still thinking because I really love Stanley Havas. I don't know if you were on the BMS Catalyst Live from 2000 and was it 20? I don't know when it was during the pandemic. It was all online, wasn't it? And Stanley Havas was an absolute legend when his cat walked across the keyboard. I don't know if you remember any Baptists watching this or listening. It was an absolute legend. It was brilliant. Then he went. Then he just said, "Are we done now?" It's like it's just brilliant. So there's some great people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, we got you both on today because in different ways you're involved in preparing people and training people for different types of ministry. And we just thought it'd be just great to share kind of what does that look like and what's that about. So perhaps you could just take a couple of sentences to say, Rob, what is the Light College and Collective, and John, what is Pathways?
Great. The Light College and Collective is simply a body of people who want to see many other people come to faith in Jesus. So at the heart of the college is finding ways to help connect people with Jesus. And through that, part of that is on the college side is training evangelists, equipping pioneers. There's an FDA course, there's a BA degree in theology, mission and evangelism. And there is also now a 1-year professional certificate in chaplaincy, which is linked in. And then the Collective is a group then for those that maybe have gone on, is a group to draw people together who are doing pioneering type projects. But it's all about, commitment to sharing the gospel. That's the heart.
Great.
And the Pathways course is the course that I lead at South Wales Baptist College. So lots of stuff that goes on in the college, but the Pathways course itself is essentially, it's a course to equip women and men from local churches across South Wales for ministry and mission within their local contexts. It's for some, it's a course that helps them discern perhaps a possible call to ministry, but for many, it's a course that helps them to learn and to be equipped, feel more perhaps better trained to minister in their local churches, and with worship leaders and children's and youth leaders, small group leaders, preachers, some lay pastors in training, we say nationally recognised ministers in training, all sorts of people really on the course. It's a wonderful mix of that. Yeah, just trying to equip people in churches. Yeah, a wonderful atmosphere and a wonderful sort of diverse group, and a sort of a huge range of stuff that we cover on the course as well, from some of the specifics like children and youth work and preaching, worship leading, to theology and Christian beliefs and the Bible and Christian spirituality. Huge range of topics that we cover over a 2-year cycle.
Yeah, I love, like, from what you both shared and from what I've experienced, is that it's all about equipping people. And I think that's, well, for me, was quite refreshing, because I always thought like ministerial training was very like prim and proper, which in some senses it can be, and it is. But I love that now there's more, or you see throughout the UK and globally, that equipping people for ministry is just simply about encouraging and equipping people with the tools to go to their local churches and into their local community and do what God is already calling them to do, and just walking alongside them as they do that. So yeah, I love what you both shared then.
Thank you.
How have you coped over the last, what's it been, 16, 18 months with the challenges of lockdown? How's that affected you guys in terms of training?
Well, I mean, the pathways, the pathways course went online at the start of the first lockdown, and funnily enough, actually, we saw a boost, an increase in the number of people accessing the course, perhaps because it was suddenly a bit more accessible to people further away, people with a bit more time to do the things they wanted to do, but perhaps hadn't just got around to do it before. So that was the wonderful aspect of it. The real struggle for us during that, and why we're kind of moving back to just in-person teaching, is, of course, we've missed so much. The learning and training for ministry is not just about lectures or learning in a classroom environment. It's so much about the learning that we get from other people through conversations and chances to watch other people and see how they are, and that interaction. So much learning goes on in that environment when we're just in the same room as other people. So that, I guess, that's been the struggle for us, recognizing that we haven't kind of we've missed out on that, and yeah, we're looking forward to getting back to that this term, and sort of, trying to recreate that for those on the course.
Yeah, I mean, very much the same for the Light College, in terms of the fact that, as with all of us involved in any kind of educational training, the fact of going online means you get something, and it's actually helped us. We've been able to, the Light College went sort of fully online with, it's Light College, particularly the courses are delivered distance learning, but through residentials. But suddenly, you can bring worship leaders in, other speakers can zoom in from various places. That has a benefit, but obviously the loss of community, and the same, obviously, the Light College, I oversee the ministerial training track in partnership with Northern Baptist College, in terms of training those that are doing the Light College stuff alongside or as part of training for Baptist ministry. And again, that was completely affected by that. But it's that loss of the face-to-face, and it's that, there's the through a glass darkly. And when you're, and perhaps when the Light College has a real emphasis on get out and do it, it's quite hard if you have to stay at home. Obviously, there's lots of other ways, but obviously, if that's your heart, it's quite difficult.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, the whole kind of learning in community thing? Because it's not like online. We talk about online communities, don't we? And it's not like it's not community. But I think you've both hinted at sometimes the important bits are quite incidental. It's the conversations, it's the moments of connection, and you can't do that in the same way online. There's, especially with things like Zoom in a big group, you've got two options now. You either say it to everybody on the Zoom call, or you just don't say it at all. And I think that's been tricky, isn't it, in terms of our communities?
Absolutely, especially when you're wanting to equip people to be relational. I mean, the question of what we're equipping people for, obviously relationality is key, and then you get sort of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, often his small text on kind of life together is often, seen as kind of key in terms of training context. And again, Eugene Peterson really pushing that sort of sense of what the minister is, your sense that you are there as actually a prayer partner and you're journeying with people. And that's very difficult. Even on this call, we're waiting for each other to talk. There's a sense, there's a formality that doesn't come in those late night conversations or whatever it may be. But we know that, but I think it's saying there is value in this, but it doesn't mean the fact we found value online doesn't mean we then have to suddenly justify either way, like why we need to keep on doing online or why actually meeting in person now seems like an indulgence because it isn't. But the two will work together, I'm sure.
Do you think there's going to be a change now with, like you said, even though there's so much value in meeting in person and having that relationship, and even like the conversations you get to have like on the breaks during training days and things like that, and the friendships you make, as well as being able to talk to the teachers now, like looking like we're coming out of COVID and everything, do you think there'll be a shift in ministerial training where there will be more teaching with online mission and things like that? Because that, like you said, John, there was more people who were able to come to the training when it was online because of distance or whatever it may be. And we had a conversation just a few weeks ago with another podcast guest who was talking about how they're doing so much more with church online because they found that's how some people interact, whether it's because of things like social anxiety or things like that. There's a lot more people engaging with church online and things like that. So do you think there'll be a shift in terms of ministerial training in the future?
I guess my best guess is that there will certainly be a shift in the recognition that online ministry is a mission is here to stay, and that's something that's perhaps a shift in context that we've seen in the last 2 years or year and a half, or just an acceleration perhaps of what was already happening. I'm not sure personally. I'm not convinced how much of their ministerial training itself will be done online, just simply purely because I think that there's so much ministerial training. It's more than just information giving. There's so much that is missed out. But yeah, I think when it comes to how we train people, certainly, and within the Pathways course, we've just launching a couple of new modules. One of them is actually about digital mission and pioneering, and so recognizing that actually that contexts have shifted, and if we think about mission and ministry being contextual, then we need to be thinking about that and helping people to think for themselves as well. Just like we've just gone through such a rapid shift in the last 18 months or so, that it's not going to be the last time that happens. So I think ministerial training can't just be training people for the context that we see right now. It's how do we train people to adapt to shifting contexts 5, 10, 20 years down the line.
Yeah. I mean, I think I can come in. I think the training model, though, or models, because there's obviously lots of research and writing that goes on in terms of how we train. I think it's that that's been challenged, I think, for years now, hasn't it? I think even in our Baptist tradition, that sense of, I think I want to start with the kind of end result in a sense and say, what are we actually training people for, and how best do we do that, rather than, and I'm absolutely passionate about the Baptist, our being Baptist and radical believing, and our Baptist history and roots and our principles, which is always a training module. But that real sense of saying, what do we think we're training people for? And sometimes I think we are putting people into a model that has to look like this or look like that. And we know we've wrestled with that, I think, within the union in terms of what does it mean to be ordained? What does it mean to be lay? What does it mean to be accredited or regionally accredited or nationally? And every region is deciding on its own thing. And then about cost and accessibility. And I've got a full-time job, so how can I do this and do that? And then what do people want and all that stuff? So I think I feel we need to start at the end, but recognizing that the end actually doesn't really make, that's hard then to say kind of actually what ministry looks like, or pastoral ministry or functional ministry, or ministry that's a bit more diverse. I've just been here in Colwyn Bay 14 years, and I do my official at the Light College and with Northern Baptist, but I'm now using half my time of my church time sort of officially to be chaplain of a local school, partly because actually if you spend a few years training chaplains and evangelists, it's actually quite hard to then not say, well, I felt God said I ought to do some of that myself as well. Because it rubs off either way, and I think that's quite good in a training context as well. So I'm going on, but I think there's a much bigger question about what we think we're actually doing beyond models and okay.
You mentioned a few different types of ministry then, and for anyone listening who maybe doesn't know what ministerial training is, or is just looking into it, or maybe this is the first time they're hearing about it, in what kind of ways can you be trained, quote unquote, for ministry?
Oh wow, do you want me to answer that, or do you want to go?
You go, Rob.
Go. I mean, well, in terms of the form and function of ministry, because we would talk about pastoral ministry being what often is seen as you're pastor of a local church or minister of a local church in a traditional role, which I would break down into the functionary role in terms of the leading of services and meetings and events and the things where you are presenting or being involved. And then you've got, call it the pastoral role, alongside kind of leadership type roles where you are leading a church, you're working with people. And I think helpfully recently I've been thinking, because I've had to think through what I do with my time and what it means for me to lead the church, about baskets. I have a leadership basket, and I have a pastoral care basket and a discipleship basket, and my own professional development basket, my own reading or spirituality, my own prayer life, devotional life, and that of others, or spiritual counseling, whatever baskets you decide. And actually, they're the things that you fill and deplete depending on different seasons you're in. So I think pastoral ministries, you might say in training models, that's what we're training people for, or often what's called soul pastorate. But the recognition is that's changing. So then we talk about chaplaincy as well as another, in a Baptist family, we've become more comfortable with chaplaincy as something which actually is a valid pursuit, because I think our model was very much about the call being confirmed, so it's being confirmed by a local congregation. But I think in terms of the models, I think now, and what Jon is doing through Pathways, and I think what all the colleges are recognizing, is that actually we're training people for different contexts. And obviously Fresh Expressions, all those years ago when that came about, challenged people to think, what do all the talk now is of pioneering settings, but what does it actually mean? I'm not sure I quite answer your question. I think if someone was looking, if they're feeling a call to ministry, I don't think they have to know what kind of ministry that is, but I think it's that sense of call, and then to explore that with the colleges that are available and the association and with your churches, and go, okay, what does that look like? But we in my church, because I've dropped some hours, so the joy is we are looking hopefully this week to appoint an assistant minister from within the church. And that person isn't ordained within the Baptist Union. I know. Don't tell anyone. But it's yeah.
I was going to say, I like that little face you pulled there.
I know. I'm suddenly realizing, I want everyone to watch this, but I also want no one to watch it. No one. But we know we have fessed up. But again, it's the sense of actually what does it mean to be? I talked about this national accreditation. There's a great, if you go onto the Baptist Union website, there is in the resource section. So I'm doing the party line. In the resource section, there is a how to be or what is a Baptist minister, and it tells you all about the national pathway. But you can also be locally, so we would look for this person to be locally accredited first. But I would be looking for that person eventually to do national accreditation. Because again, it's about equipping and training. It's not necessarily about the end result, but it's about the process at the heart of that. But we're simply recognizing his call and God's call on us. This is the person for now. And this is the person for, and he's also going to be setting up Youth for Christ in Colwyn Bay at the same time. So it's really good stuff, and actually we'd be fools not to.
Yeah.
There's always the debate over, is this the proper process? And that's a fair question. But it's just seeing the call in someone's life, and that's the heart. So I'm answering your question about 18 minutes in, which is, it's always about call and about heart, and about passion for the gospel. And
I think what,
John,
in that example, Rob, was that person within the church is going to be ministering, and as they are ministering, you're talking about sort of go through sort of that national sort of recognition sort of pathway, and that training that goes with that. And I think really you asked about how do we train? What does training? How is someone trained for ministry? Well, I think in one sense, ministers are always being trained. There's a formal aspect of training, and a kind of a sense of recognition that goes with that, or ordination, and such. But really, ultimately, as ministers, we are being continually trained, in our own spiritual growth, as the Holy Spirit works and challenges us personally, as we read and study, as we continue to learn. And I think it's very much that setting. But that doesn't just begin with a call to ministry, does it? That becomes from the moment we turn to Christ, that we are growing as disciples. Ultimately, when I was doing my ministerial training, Reverend Dr. Peter Stevenson in South Wales Baptist College, he had this phrase you always use: as ministers, you are called to be exemplary disciples, and it stuck with me because a huge part of our training as ministers is our own personal discipleship, our own personal formation, and that's not something that we ever stop learning or training in. So in one sense, it's a continuation and a deepening of our own personal discipleship. Yes, of course, there are specific roles and responsibilities that pastoral ministers or chaplains or many of the ministers have, that need that specific training and practice and instruction. But in many ways, I think that those practical things are very much a secondary to the sort of the personal formation.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I was thinking, as you've both been sharing about how ministry is sort of recognizing different types of ministry, different opportunities, different contexts for ministry. On one hand, that's really exciting, just to recognize that and to encourage that. On the other hand, for you guys, that's really challenging, because it would be really easy if you were just training for the same type of same type of church or whatever. But I would hazard a guess that if we were to look at each of our sort of calendars and the kind of stuff we were up to, it would all fall into ministry and mission, but it would look really, really different for each of us. And then you've got evangelists, chaplains, youth workers, children's workers. So do you think there are things that are the same, that are good to study, that are helpful to study, and how do you, in terms of that ongoing stuff, John, you were talking there about the personal discipleship and the role of the Holy Spirit. Rob, you mentioned in calling people and drawing people. So how does training seek to recognize just all of that in one place, do you think?
I think one helpful thing to do is to distinguish between the mission and the method. So, if you like, the mission that we all have as followers of Jesus, but particularly as ministers, is I believe that is set out in the Great Commission to make disciples and baptize and to teach people to obey and to live in the way of Jesus. But so that mission is shared, whether someone is a children and youth or families worker, whether they're a sort of pastoral minister, chaplain. Yeah, there's perhaps a different sort of slight slant to that potentially there, but evangelist or church planter, whatever it is, that mission is essentially the same. But what changes then is the methods, and that's perhaps based on our context, our spiritual gifts, and our experience that we bring, and that all affects our methods. So we were talking about the pandemic, and I think one of the challenges to us as churches and pastors was that when the pandemic changed, it was a real challenge. Perhaps I think it felt to many of us at first like a huge challenge, because we couldn't do the things that we did. What I found very helpful was just to think, okay, it's the pandemic affected our methods, but it made no difference to our mission. Our mission remained the same. We had to find completely new methods to achieve the same mission. So I think when we're training people for all sorts of different types of ministry, different contexts, I think that's helpful. And so because that mission is the same, it's regardless of the method, the context, and the spiritual gifts and stuff that will be used, and the way that ministry looks on the outside, essentially it comes from the same foundation. I think so I think there is that shared foundation around the Bible, around Rob talks about the traditional Christian spirituality, and with our even our history, but and our sort of our beliefs. But then there are you do have to have diverge off to do the kind of the different work on the particulars of perhaps some of the methods. We're just starting to do that in the Pathways course. We kind of just slightly restructured it so that there are a couple of, we're setting some modules alongside each other. We recognize perhaps some of the more practical ones. So just coming up in a few weeks, next month, we've got 2 modules sitting alongside each other, a preaching module and a children's and youth work module, recognizing that for some people, this call to ministry and mission in a local church will take them into a setting with children and young people. And so how can we train people and equip them to communicate at an appropriate level and work with children, young people and families? But for others, it will take them into a different setting, and they will, that practice and that discipline of preaching is going to be a really effective and important communication method for them to take that message of Jesus into where the context that God is calling them. So we want to train them. So yeah, sometimes there has to be a divergence, but I think it has to come from the shared foundation, I think, of that mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the modules that we teach at the Light College, or I teach, is called Evangelistic Communication and Preaching. So I suppose it's the preaching module, but it's about how do you communicate the gospel? And I remember the work from sort of Mike Bree and others at Paul McConaughey at St. Thomas Crooks in Sheffield and Philadelphia, very much this thing about, took away these kind of 4 V's about, in churches or ministry settings, vision, values, vocabulary and vehicle, and the sense that, you need to know where you are vision and values wise. Vocabulary is the language that we use to articulate that, and sometimes recognizing that often the issue for many people in churches or in any organization is we're using different language to mean the same thing, but we can't get over the language barrier. And that is, I think, quite an interesting thing to explore within churches when, people say you must explain it like this, whereas, are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Well, are you, do you know Jesus? I'm saying the same thing. Or no, you're not. Well, I am. But then the method is the least important thing. In a sense, it's the most important because the front facing, but on the other hand, it's the least important because that can change. And maybe it's recognizing models of training that actually, like when I trained to be a primary teacher, we were being taught how to teach rather than what to teach. Because once you know how to teach, then you can teach lots of things, which you have to do at primary. And the same with why academic stuff, I would say, is really important because it teaches you to be critical thinker. It teaches you to be reflective. It teaches you to know where to look, even if it's not your field. And I think all of those skills get us away from this idea of ministry is about a certain type of competence or comparing ourselves with big American churches or whatever is the flavor of the month that isn't like ours, and we see a level of competency and equipment and we go, wow, goodness, we can't possibly be like that. And actually, it's the heart. I mean, Tom Wright, NT Wright, was asked, how would you train people for ministry? And he said, if I had my way, the first year they just read the Bible. It's not the worst plan, actually, is it? Really?
No, absolutely.
Just spend a year reading the Bible and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
That's not the worst plan. Read it and pray a bit, and then we'll see how we go. I quite fancy that, actually.
You'd be a really slow reader to take a whole year to read the Bible, wouldn't you?
I know, amazing, isn't it? Well, it's just Leviticus is tricky.
We've mentioned a few things about the essential of the sense of a call to ministry, of a person coming to realize this is what God wants me to do, with my life. And how do you think people come to recognize that, that God is drawing them into something? What are the kind of big themes do you think that you hear from people that are coming to training about how they've recognized that God has spoken to them in that way?
We're waiting. I mean, I could say, I suppose it's back to what was being said before and what John was saying about if you're kind of in ministry, and we do this in churches too. I mean, if I'm looking, we have elders and deacons. If I'm looking for someone who could be an elder, I'm looking for a person who's kind of already doing it, and it's that question of, and again, it's back to our sort of training model of, is it suddenly at the point where now you can do proper training, that you're actually an ordinand or a minister in training, but actually you could have been planting lots of churches and lots of other things prior to that. So I think it's seeing the resonance, seeing the integrity in that person's life, in terms of what they are, and recognizing maybe I've increased it, as we said, ministry is so broad that again, it's kind of saying, what is this setting look like? I mean, I don't want a hierarchy that says, minister, accredited minister is the thing, rather than the youth worker or the children's worker or even the chaplain. But I think it's that sense. I think it's about that faith step, isn't it? And Eugene Peterson would perhaps very much talk about, it's the servant leadership nature of ministry, recognizing that actually it's not really a career, it is a calling, and that obviously is embedded within our structures of stipend and self-assessment tax, even within the law, that you're set aside not because you're perhaps extra special, but just because the church has recognized in you that we want to give you more space to do the things that you are good at and that you're being called to. But I think when that sense of call, I think that then is confirmed, isn't it, by the people around you. And I would also say within, as we pray, I've had many kind of, in my recent move, I had massive faith step, and the church has been so gracious when you announce, I'd like to reduce my hours. But a massive faith step, I've been through that recently, of just, a year and a half ago, someone saying, we'd like you to consider this as a role. And I'm thinking, and then, are you going to bring instability? And then you realize it's not actually about me. So maybe that's part of it too, is that if God calls, God equips, and it's meant to be uncomfortable. Or I'm not doing that whole thing of, if it's uncomfortable, then it's the right thing. But the faith step means that if it was just, could have just sat here, and even with my Northern and Light College stuff, and just could have been going just, yeah, fine. But actually there's a challenge. And I think that's part of the nature of call, is I've got a sense that I've got to do this. This is what God's calling me to. Does it make any sense? I don't know. I think the faith step, that's been the big thing for me now, is just to go, okay, let's go and do this in a different context, but part of my context.
Yeah. I think a big thing for a lot of people is often thinking they're like, oh, I'm not quite qualified to go into ministry, or haven't got the formal qualifications, because that's kind of the world we live in, is all the way through school. It's well, you have to do well to get your GCSEs, so you can get your A levels, and then you have to do well in your A levels, so you can go to university, and you have to do well in university, so you can get a good job. So there's a lot of focus on qualifications and kind of working your way up to something. And I think maybe that's where sometimes we can get confused with ministry, because in some sense it's something you do have to be trained in, like you would in school, but it's also, like you said, Rob, a call on your life, and then that's taking that step of faith of, actually, I'm going to respond to this call, respond to what I think God is calling me into. And you kind of have to forget about, well, not completely forget, but push back the things of, oh, I don't think I'm quite qualified, because like you said, God equips, God called, doesn't.
Yeah, it's like
got it the wrong way around. You equips the called.
Absolutely, not to be really rude, but I think that's really, because I think if we look at, we mentioned, I think I love who's on your team, we might quote amazing ministers of the gospel, and we think we could never be like that. And actually, you've got to recognise that actually those people have been doing that for a long time. You know, one preacher said the first 1,000 sermons are the hardest ones, and then after that, so we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people who have been doing it a long time, or who might be very, very competent in that. And I think that's something that's a problem. And the first time I ever preached, when I was at Regent's, not as a ministerial student, and the guy who's another Baptist minister now just said, "You were awful." I was really, really. Oh, wow. You were rubbish, but I think you'll be okay in the future.
Yeah.
You know, and that's okay, isn't it? Isn't that what it's about? You know, we have all this nonsense about, oh, it's a safe place to fail. It never really feels very safe.
No.
So how do we create those safe places where it's about the heart, not always we pride ourselves on competence rather than we do about the heart. I'd rather the worship leader who is a bit iffy on the guitar but has a heart for worship rather than the one who looks brilliant. Anyway, that's me. But John, sorry, I'm stopping you.
But I just think the Bible story as a whole, tells us over and over again, isn't it, that God calls people, that God's call, the call comes before the training. The call doesn't follow the training follows the call. Time and time again, God calls people who we would call incompetent. To do tasks that they are not equipped to do, and then he trains them. He equips. Think of the disciples. That Jesus called and was sending out in twos and just in that whole ministry. But he called a bunch of incompetent people essentially, and then trained them up and released them. Probably, if I'm honest, before I would have. I'm constantly amazed. That which is like mentioned the Great Commission earlier. And just before that, the disciples come to the mountain to see the resurrected Jesus, and they worshipped him. And as some of them doubted, then some of them were unsure. But Jesus still gave them the Great Commission, I think, and sent them out and gave them, that enormous task to do that they did, filled with the Holy Spirit. And I think it's that the calling comes first, doesn't it? And you're right, Emilia. That's the opposite way around. That we see in society today, in our culture. In our culture, that the calling follows the training. You don't apply for a job until you've got the qualification. In God's kingdom, it's the other way around.
And I think perhaps that's why there's been a bit. I think there's a backlash against ministerial training in the last 20 years or so, maybe, not to make too much of that, but I think the backlash is like, why do I need to be trained at all? So people then look for, that's the other way around to see it, is go, actually in my context here in my little bit of North Wales, actually quite a number, I was part of a group of local church leaders, and I was unusual because I was the only one who'd gone through any kind of formal ministerial accreditation, because often they were newer churches or offshoots from other churches. And I think, and that's not devaluing them or devaluing me, but it's that I think there's just something interesting there about what we think the training is for, and how it equips the called, as we were saying, how it takes those but still puts the focus, because I think part of my sense then of what God's been doing and mixing things up here at the church is I can be, despite, I would say, but other people might shout on, fairly competent in various things. But actually what these changes do is challenge my sense of my reliance on my own competence. So I'm placed into places where actually I need to be a Christian rather than a Christian atheist who kind of ticks the box but doesn't actually need God. And I think it's helpful for ministers to need God a little bit. And that's what we need in our training. So I think there's something, and then John, you were saying, there's something swirling around there, I think.
Yeah. I often think that when you read, John 21, breakfast on the beach, and Peter's sort of reinstated in the group, and he has this conversation with Jesus, and then Jesus gives him the role of, it says, feed my sheep, take care of my flock. And even Peter's like, well, wouldn't John be better? And, the other disciples must have sat there thinking, he's the one that, he was warned about this. He did it anyway. and he's the one. And I've often wondered, like, did it have to be Peter? Like, did Jesus, like, is Jesus making a point there about who the church is for, and what this community is going to be about? That it's either about second chances or it's not the church. And so I think there's something in that those things that, like you were saying, Rob, those things that you feel very competent in and able to do, you're actually able to do, you know, on your own, kind of thing. Whereas ministry has always got to be a partnership with Jesus and with the Spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a local meeting a few years ago now about a town centre chaplaincy here in Colwyn Bay, and we'd had people had applied to be the kind of volunteer chaplains. They went through an application process, and there was obviously an employed chaplain as well. And one person had come, and that person had struggles with alcohol, had had criminal records, but had been just miraculously had come to faith and was just gloriously full of the gospel. And had experience in the retail sector. This was about being chaplain to the shops. And what was really interesting was in the meeting that this person was shared as they weren't there. The name was shared, and someone said, "Well, this isn't the kind of person we want." And I said, "Well, what about grace and redemption?" On restaurant. So and it was generally said in a Christian meeting, can we leave grace and redemption to one side at the moment?
Wow.
And you kind of go, there's something there, and I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, I'm not mentioning any names or contexts, but it's always stuck with me, is that's the risk. And Peterson was big on that. That's the risk. You end up that actually we can leave because we're so competent. Our organizations look so good. We're training our ministers and people in ministry to be so good at all this, and it's really helpful. Church doesn't need to be the Rachel Tolbert Baptist Union again, nothing spiritual about chaos. But on the other hand, if we think we don't need grace and we don't need redemption, then we are Christian atheists, and that's not a good place to be.
No, I think that's what's really refreshing about this conversation, is talking about what ministry looks like and breaking it down a bit. So it's not like, I think sometimes we can have the perception that like ministry training is kind of like going to a big Middle Ages castle and you come out and you wear the robes and everything. And I remember speaking to a friend, I think it was on a day we were having church baptisms, and she was asking like, well, who's the I think she called him the vicar, like instead of the pastor, and she said like, who's the vicar, and like the deacons and things like that. And I was like, oh well, like that man standing there, like he's one of the deacons. And she was like, oh, the big friendly man with the guitar. And I was like, yeah. And then I said, and that's our pastor. And she was like, oh, the one in shorts and t-shirt. I was like, yeah, like that's the pastor. And I think it kind of, when we speak about it and people get to hear about it, it kind of breaks those misconceptions of what ministry or people, church doesn't have a hierarchy, but if people who believe or think that it does have a hierarchy, kind of breaks that thought process. And actually, like our ministers and our pastors, they're not people who are perfect and don't need grace and redemption, like you said, Rob, but actually they are people who are continuously under training and continuously growing in discipleship, and following that call that God has placed on their lives. And not, I think it's important to acknowledge that the hierarchy isn't actually there. Like we always talk about, like you could be the youth worker or the pastor, you could be the person that puts the chairs away or sweeps the floor after the services, as long as it's all unto God.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really great about this conversation. But in what ways do you think you find ministry training changing going forward? We've kind of spoke about it a little bit, but especially now kind of post-COVIDness as well.
I think, for me, and I think John can come in on this, accessibility. So the Pathways course is about accessibility. I think cost, very practically, if we're asking people, if we are saying for some kind of professional training or accreditation, you need to do these things, the cost of that in addition is a real issue. And it's not just about value for money, but there is a real sense of what am I getting for that? Because that whole point about, do I need to be trained in the first place? Because I can do this without, then we need to make it accessible. We do need to, I think, raise those questions about hierarchy, and I think we need to confront what is known as sort of anti-intellectualism, like, you know, that sense that goes the other way. Like for some circles, it was always about having all the qualifications, and some it's about not having the qualifications. I recognize I might be freaking some out and freaking myself out for wearing a dog collar in this. It's just that I'm in a chaplaincy. I've come from my chaplaincy role, and in that chaplaincy role, I wear a collar so the kids know who I am. Does that define me? Also, again, that's the sense of training which doesn't have an inherent hierarchy that says you are more than this or that, but also embraces the fact that actually, if wearing a collar, you know, I become all things to all people, if that's what helps in a context to make a connection, and someone in the dining room came over and spoke to me, they wouldn't have spoken to me. They wouldn't have known who I was. So I don't know, John, if what you think about what Pathways is doing and what's happening at South Wales in terms of that accessibility issue.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the accessibility, the cost, a big factors. It's, I think, often driven, you know, by the changing contexts. You know, just in ministry as a whole, I think less and less churches, particularly in Wales, are able to call a full-time minister. And you know, obviously, you know, Rob and I are here as ministers in local churches, but both of us are part-time in our roles like that, and in the local church, and so that sense of bivocational sort of ministry is becoming more and more prevalent out of necessity. But I think that there's a healthy aspect to that as well, and so often I think training needs to reflect that too. You know, depending on what, you know, job role that people come here. I came as a teacher. You know, I sensed that God very clearly, part of my calling, God was calling me to finish my job and to train full time. But if the call had, you know, been different, it would have been very difficult for me, because at the time I couldn't have done that, you know, sort of part-time teacher, part-time sort of ministerial training. And the reality is, by the time I finished my training and was ordained, my sort of accreditation as a secondary school teacher had run out. So that would have, you know, I couldn't have just gone back to teaching. So I mean, you know, what's wonderful now is that the ministerial training in South Wales, that there's an option, and most of the people who train, you know, train in a way that allows those that work often during the week. A lot of the training happens over weekends, and sort of long weekends and retreats that allows that people to do that. And I think perhaps that flexibility is an important part of the future. But yeah, I think perhaps it's coming back to, yeah, the contexts.
Because I mean, I would say, I was just thinking that very much we don't want to go the other way and say everything has to be fragmented. There was a real privilege and I think a value in saying train full time, spend your days reading the Bible, reading theology, you know, because I mean, again, if that's you know, I think it's not one or the other, but I think for some, you know, you preach your theology, I would say, you lead in your theology. You know, it's not just, so it's not, I think the danger in all of this, and the Light College is facing this, and with Northern as well, in terms of, you know, are we just trying to find kind of shortcuts, to be honest, you know, trying to find ways to make it more palatable or easier or this and that, whereas inherently, actually, if I'm going to journey with people, I'm a bit like, I'm not demeaning it, but I think I did a call, you know, with the in holidays, you're there with an umbrella walking through Venice and you're going, follow me. And I did it once, like with a guidebook in my back pocket. I was only like a road ahead. I was only one site ahead. But it's that sense of you need to be a little bit ahead. You need to be knowing where you're leading people and journeying, but again, in a position of faith. So I think all those models, I think what I'm getting from this is there's no one way or no one easy way.
Yeah.
But I do think accessibility and cost is key. But how we equip and give people that space so that people at the end of the day get people who are leading them, who are confident and know the beauty of God's peace in that process. Don't feel they're making it up as they go along. That's the other thing. Well, perhaps I do.
Oh, well, guys, it's been so great to talk to both of you, and I think it's probably something that as churches we don't sort of recognise sort of enough, just how much you guys pour in, you and others, I know, into the lives of people that are training for all different kinds of ministries. So thank you for all that you are doing. Countless hours, I'm sure, of, just prep and prayer and, panic, and at the moment running around trying to make sure everyone can use Zoom and everything, but it is massively appreciated. So thanks for all that you are doing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
No, and all the countless others who are doing it. We're both just part of, and perhaps we're both part. We represent the lower end of the hierarchy.
I think we'd both be the first to say that it's always a privilege and it's a joy, because the joy isn't just in the teaching. It certainly isn't in the marking and all the admin. The joy is seeing God calling people, is seeing people called and equipped for ministry and going out and just giving it a go and coming back and sharing the stories. That's the joy of the role, certainly for me, that it's just seeing that and that excitement of just getting that, perhaps maybe not quite front row but second row seat. This is what God is doing around us, because when you're immersed just in the world of local ministry, it's hard to see beyond the boundaries of your church's kind of community, and actually it's a wonderful, in a setting like a college. You get just a broader view of what is God doing in these places that I've never been to, so maybe never heard of. But just these stories, these people that God is calling, He's drawing together to train, to equip, and to send out. And it's exciting.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you very much.
You've been listening to TeamTalk, a new podcast series from the South Wales Baptist Association.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, share and subscribe.
Find us on Facebook, YouTube or Instagram.
And for more information, check out swba.org.uk/TeamTalk. Thanks for listening.